They call it the cancer of the sea, but the truth is much more profitable for the people holding the grinders. Today we expose the hull osmosis hoax, why boatyards want you terrified of blisters. For decades, owners of classic fiberglass have been told that a few bubbles below the waterline are a death sentence for their vessel. We have seen sailors walk away from their dream boats because a surveyor used a scary word and a $20,000 repair estimate. But what if most of these lethal blisters are nothing more than a cosmetic pimple on a tank? There is a secret about the Iron Age of solid glass that the industry is desperate to hide, because if you knew the truth, you would never pay for a bottom job again. Is your boat actually rotting from the inside out? Or are you just paying for the boatyard owner's next luxury truck? A retiree stands under his boat, survey report in hand, heart pounding as the words leap from the page, "Cancer of the sea." The diagnosis lands like a punch. The next line is worse, a $20,000 estimate for a full hull peel, vacuum-bagged repair, and an epoxy barrier coat. The quote is as cold as it is final. The yard's estimator does not blink. He points out the scattered blisters below the waterline, each one circled in red on a glossy printout. He says these are serious. We see this all the time. If you do not act now, the hull could be compromised. The language is clinical, almost forensic. Terms like incipient osmotic blistering and progressive laminate delamination are delivered with the authority of a crime lab. There is no mention of the hull's actual thickness, 2 full inches of solid fiberglass, built in the Iron Age of boat building when overkill was the norm. Instead, the focus is on the surface, on the bubbles, on the threat. The retiree's dream of blue water passage morphs into a nightmare of invoices and grinding dust. This is not an isolated story. Across marinas, the same script plays out. Surveyors wield moisture meters and tap hammers like crime scene investigators, searching for evidence that justifies a verdict. The owner is told that big blisters will weaken the laminate. The implication is clear: every blemish is a ticking time bomb. The $20,000 price tag becomes the ocean's invoice, stamped urgent. Owners are told to walk away, or worse, to run. What is left out is the reality. Most of these blisters are little more than pimples on a tank. There is no autopsy, no core sample, no measurement of how deep the problem truly goes. Just the monetization of risk, fear packaged, sold, and financed. And every time the grinder spins, another truck payment is made. Seamanship, once a skill, is sidelined by consumerist paranoia. The yard's profit grows, but the owner's confidence shrinks. The cycle repeats, fueled by the same alarmist phrases and the same 5-figure estimates, until someone finally asks for proof. Every time a retiree is handed a $20,000 quote for a hull peel, a certain kind of hunger is being fed. The yard's estimator, sleeves rolled, does not just see a boat. He sees a revenue stream. The script is always the same: clinical words, urgent warnings, and a diagnosis that only the yard can fix. This is the business model of the corporate vampire. The real product is not safety or peace of mind, it is the monetization of risk. In the world behind the invoice, I have split open hundreds of hulls. I have pried into the so-called cancer and found nothing but surface bruises, blisters no deeper than a fingernail, sitting atop 2 inches of solid, hand-laid glass. Yet, the yard's prescription rarely changes. The default is the full peel. Strip the gel coat, grind down the laminate, vacuum bag a new skin, and bury the evidence beneath a fresh epoxy barrier. No core samples, no mechanical testing, just the gospel of the grinder. This is not about science, it is about economics. The labor hours stack up, the material costs inflate, and the profit margin, 10, sometimes 20% on a $20,000 job, lands squarely in the yard's pocket. The estimator's pen is sharper than any chisel. Every alarmist phrase, incipient osmotic failure, and progressive delamination translates into another line item, another truck payment, another year of bonuses for the shop manager. I have watched as owners, paralyzed by CSI-style jargon, hand over their savings for work that does nothing to strengthen the boat. Seamanship was once a skill. Now it has been replaced by consumerist paranoia, sold to the highest bidder. The corporate vampire thrives on this fear, draining confidence and cash in equal measure. But the hull, the real hull, remains thick as a tank, waiting for someone competent enough to ask for proof. In the end, knowledge is free, and free means competent. That is what terrifies them most. A hull built in the 1970s isn't just a shell, it's a fortress. Drop a caliper onto the laminate and the numbers don't lie, 45mm, sometimes 50mm of solid glass. That's nearly 2 inches of hand-laid polyester and woven roving, a mass that would make a modern cord hull look like a soda can by comparison. The difference isn't subtle. On a contemporary boat, you are lucky to find 6 to 12mm of skin before you hit foam or balsa. On these old cruisers, you can drive a tap hammer from the keel to the waterline and get the same sharp report you would hear from a marble countertop, solid, unyielding, indifferent to the little bruises on its surface. I have run my fingers along hulls that have circled the globe twice, their bellies speckled with blisters the size of dimes, the so-called pimples on a tank. The yards want you to believe these are the first sign of terminal decay, but when you actually measure, when you put a digital caliper to the edge of a core plug or slice a section for microscopy, you see the truth. The blister rarely makes it past the first 2 or 3mm. The rest is untouched, dry as the day it left the mold. That is less than 5% of the laminate's depth. In forensic terms, it is a surface wound, a scratch on a bank vault door. The tap test is the oldest trick in the book, and still the most honest. You strike the hull with a coin or a small hammer and listen for the ring. A clear high note means the glass is sound. A dull thud might mean a pocket or a void, but in these thick hulls, even a dull spot is usually just a shallow bruise, cosmetic, not structural. I have stood with surveyors who tap out a grid, circling every muted note in red, turning a few harmless blisters into a map of imaginary danger. They never mention the mass beneath their feet. They never acknowledge that you would have to grind through 1.5 inches of glass before you would even threaten the boat's integrity. Take a 2-inch thick hull. A blister would have to tunnel through 40mm of glass to reach daylight on the inside. The physics just don't add up. Water cannot build enough pressure to force its way through that much laminate. The only thing at risk is the owner's wallet, not the hull. The proof is tactile, physical, undeniable. I have cut open hulls that were written off as terminal by 3 different surveyors, only to find dry, healthy laminate an inch below the surface. The grinder's verdict is always the same: thick, overbuilt, and ready for another crossing. This isn't theory, it is measurement. It is mass. It is the reason these boats are still afloat, decades after the first blister appeared. The next layer of evidence comes under the microscope, but the first truth is right there in your hand. A hull so thick you could land a hammer on it and barely leave a dent. The pimple on a tank, nothing more. A microscope does not care about sales quotas or scare tactics. In the lab, a blistered hull sample tells its story in resin and glass, not dollar signs. A materials scientist slides a polished cross-section under the lens. The verdict is clinical, final. The blister is a shallow dome, barely penetrating the gel coat and the first millimeter or 2 of polyester matrix. Beyond that, the laminate is untouched, bone dry, the glass fibers locked in a tight weave, no sign of delamination, no spreading rot. The so-called cancer is a surface blemish, not a structural wound. Under high magnification, the anatomy of a classic polyester blister reveals itself. The gel coat, once a shiny shield now pitted and micro-cracked from years of ultraviolet and salt, lets water molecules sneak through. That water finds a pocket of unreacted resin or a cluster of soluble salts, remnants from the original layup, sometimes decades old. Osmotic pressure builds, swelling the pocket into a bubble. But the physics are clear. Water diffusion in polyester is slow, the osmotic force is weak compared to the mass of glass beneath. The scientist traces the blister's edge with a probe, 2.5 millimeters deep at most. In a hull that measures 45 millimeters thick, that is less than 6% of the total laminate. The rest is fortress, immune to the drama on the surface. The lab runs a moisture profile across the sample. The outer gel coat and the first millimeter of resin show a slight uptick, maybe 1.5% water by weight. Beyond that, the numbers drop to baseline, indistinguishable from a control panel stored in a warehouse. No chloride spike, no sulfate contamination, no signature of seawater tunneling deep into the laminate. The scientist notes, no evidence of interlaminar shear loss, no microcracking beyond the blister cavity. The laminate rings like marble under an ultrasonic pulse, no echo gap, no voids, no hidden decay. For reference, the lab compares a sample from a modern cord hull. There, water intrusion races through the thin outer skin, reaches the foam or balsa core in months, sometimes weeks, and triggers real structural loss. But in the old solid glass hull, the diffusion pathway is long, the pressure dissipates, and the blister stalls at the surface. The difference is not subtle. Polyester resin is permeable, yes, but only to a point. The hull is not a sponge, it is a vault. The scientist's report lands with the force of a gavel. Surface blistering is confined to the outer gel coat and the first resin layer. No evidence of structural compromise. Laminate integrity intact. The technical jargon has no room for panic. The numbers are proof. The microscope does not lie, and neither does the mass of glass beneath your feet. The audit is closed. The pimple on the tank is just that, a cosmetic bruise, not a death sentence. Haul-out begins with the promise of salvation, but the workflow reads like a slow-motion mugging. First, the boat is lifted and blocked. The estimator's clipboard ticks off the hours. Labor starts at $125 per man per hour. Next comes the grinder. The gel coat is stripped away layer by layer until the hull is naked and raw. Clouds of fiberglass dust drift across the yard. What is left behind is not a surgical incision, it is a wound, open and oozing, exposing the first millimeters of laminate. For a 1970s hull, that means grinding into the top 2 or 3 millimeters of a 50 millimeter wall. The pimple is gone, but now the fortress is breached. The workflow never stops at the surface. Every suspect area is chased deeper. If the moisture meter squeals, the grinder follows. In some yards, the peel goes beyond the gel coat, into the woven roving, past the polyester matrix, sometimes right down to the original layup. I have seen yards remove half an inch of solid glass from a hull that crossed the Atlantic twice without a creak. One slip with the grinder and you have lost the hand. Laid strength that made these boats legendary. After the peel, the hull is left to dry, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. Dehumidifiers hum, heaters run, invoices stack up. When the numbers look right, the yard lays on new glass, vacuum bags the repair, and buries the evidence under epoxy. The final step is a fresh barrier coat, gleaming, flawless, and expensive. The owner is handed a bill for $20,000 and told the hull is better than new. But what has really been fixed? A surface bruise, traded for a thinner, weaker hull, and a yard manager's new truck. The workflow is efficient at extracting dollars. The risk, as always, is paid by the owner. The ledger tells the truth that the sales pitch never will. On the desk in the yard manager's office, every line item is calibrated to one thing: fear. The $20,000 peel is not just a repair, it is the ocean's invoice, stamped and signed by the corporate vampire. Labor, materials, dehumidifiers, and hours with the grinder all stack up, but the real profit hides in the markup. 10%, sometimes 20%, lands in the owner's pocket before the first ounce of resin is mixed. That is $2,000 to $4,000 pure profit every time the alarm bell rings. A whistleblower, once a yard manager, now out, breaks the script wide open. He admits that they were told to make the risk sound irreversible, his voice flat, eyes on the numbers. The checklist is gospel. Every survey that mentions incipient osmotic failure triggers the upsell. Whether the blisters are shallow pimples or deep bruises, the answer is always the same: full peel, vacuum bag, barrier coat. No core sample, no mechanical test, just a diagnosis that reads like a verdict. The scripting is precise. Owners are led, step by step, toward the most expensive fix. A 3mm blister on a 2-inch hull still gets the $20,000 treatment. The real cost of targeted repair, drill, dry, fill might be $3,000, but that is not on the menu. The ocean's invoice is padded, every line item fatter than the last. The yard's profit is built on the owner's panic, not the hull's reality. The corporate vampire thrives in the fog of technical language, draining confidence and cash, while the tank, fortress thick and ocean-proven, waits for someone to see past the script. Forget the panic, here is how to take control. Start with a simple triage. Run your hand along the hull and look for clusters of blisters. Grab a coin or a small hammer and tap each spot. A clear ringing note means solid glass. A dull thud might mean a void, but on a 2-inch hull, it is almost always surface deep. Next, break out a moisture meter. Sweep it over the grid. Readings below 3% mean you are in the clear. Anything higher, mark it, but do not jump to conclusions. Only escalate if you find soft spots, cracks radiating from a blister, or moisture readings above 5%. That is when an ultrasound or a core sample might be justified. Document everything. Take photos, log your readings, and keep a chain of custody if you pull a core. Most owners never need to go beyond tap and moisture. The thick hull is your firewall. It is a pimple on a tank, nothing more. A cruiser owner, let's call her the sovereign sailor, stands by her 40-year-old hull, the bottom speckled with blisters after a decade afloat. Surveyors called it incipient osmotic failure. The yard pitched a full peel. She shrugged, drilled out the worst, filled a handful of spots, and sailed on. Years later, her logbook reads like a victory march. Biscay, the Azores, 2 Atlantic crossings. The hull, still thick as a tank, still dry below the waterline, still ringing true under the tap hammer. She laughs about the scare language now. She says, "We fixed what needed fixing and kept the rest." The blisters never spread, never deepened, never threatened the core. Her boat became a fortress, not a liability. That's the reality. Seamanship, vigilance, and a little common sense trump the ocean's invoice every time. Confidence is free, and free means competent. The sovereign sailor sails on, blisters and all. Today, the monetization of risk still stalks the docks, trading on consumerist paranoia over what is usually just a pimple on a 2-inch thick tank. Old fiberglass hulls, battle-tested and ocean-proven, shrug off the ocean's invoice while boatyards sharpen their grinders. Free means competent. Fear means profit. Seamanship was once a skill. Now, knowledge is resistance and relief. Don't let a corporate vampire turn blisters into bankruptcy. Your boat is stronger than their story. Share your sea tales below.